Hello, everybody, and welcome to our Seeking Harmony conversation. We are today looking at some topics that we found to be very relevant for us in this period of time and that are topical. So I'd like to open it up to the team and find out from you which one you feel would be your primary one to go to right now.
Yeah, I guess I feel like talking about Peru and the stuff that Peru has gone through recently and is going through. Because yeah, it's just an interesting story. And it brings up some cool things about like people feeling heard and what people will do in order to like feel represented and feel heard. So yeah, the gist of it is that the ex-president, the now ex-president of Peru, President Castillo, Congress, I think, was going to impeach him in Peru. And he was supposed to be like a leader who was elected by people who aren't normally represented. He was like, I was talking to someone yesterday who's from Peru, and she's like, all these people in like the remote mountain districts of Peru who normally don't vote because they feel like they're not gonna have someone, it's just gonna be some white person representing who is like far removed from them. And many, like a quarter of Peru's population is indigenous, right? And many of those people live out in those remote rural districts, and they face like poverty and drought and lots of problems with COVID, and they just have not felt represented. But they came out to vote for Castillo last year because he was from that kind of area, and it was thought that he would represent them. But Congress was going to impeach him for some charges that he was facing about how he governed. I did not remember what it was right now, unfortunately, but it could come to us. But so instead, he declared that he was going to dissolve Congress and just rule by decree, which is something that like other people have been doing in Latin America, like Nicolas Maduro in Venezuela. And I think maybe it was kind of like just an effort to be like, well, the people support me. I'm like popular, and perhaps this will like, go over well. And it didn't go over well, and he was captured. He literally was driving away and caught in traffic. Like in his getaway car was caught in traffic. And so they got him, and, he's been removed from office, and, he's being removed from office, and his vice president's supposed to take over. But a lot of people are protesting, trying to shut down airports, shutting down railways, markets, and because they feel like this is our leader, he's supposed to represent people who often aren't represented. And so there's just a lot of controversy about it right now. And yeah, I felt like it was like cool to bring up because it feels like this is someone who so many people feel very emotionally invested in, like that this is someone who's supposed to represent them. And he faced so much discrimination himself and racism from people who just mocked him for being openly who he was while being president. And they're saying, you can't do this to him. This is our leader, regardless of what he's done, even if he is trying to like impose like dictatorship on the country in a way. So I just felt that that was an interesting one to speak about. And yeah, so that's my intro. What did you guys feel about it?
So, yeah, I think something that's quite interesting for me that stands out is just in you sharing the sense that he was meant to be of the people, but he's been shrouded in significant corruption charges. And there's just literally been a level of question mark around his presidency. And I mean, like just a case in point is that you can't even escape properly, kind of thing. I know it sounds ridiculous, but like for somebody to actually be trying to get away, to be stuck in traffic, surely you know your country well enough to know what's happening in your country. So, like it sounds like a ludicrous example, but all of those little things to me just says, like, were you really for the people and of the people? Like, do you really know what the reality is in your country? And then the, almost disastrous power grab just also brings a question mark. And, it's followed across history that absolute power absolutely corrupts. So, like, you have to ask the question, when do we as humanity truly learn this collective and soul lesson? And when does, as a collective, do we start to make the choice that life just becomes much more inclusive of the collective? There's a lot of things around choice, and there's a lot of things around power. And it seems like in Peru, there's a significant disconnect between choice and power and really being for the people. And yet those same people who he hasn't really been for are protesting that he's our person. And, it strikes me as a parallel with some things that happen in South Africa. So people complain about the presidency and the government. And the minute that there's a call for impeachment hearings and things like that, there's very much a situation of closing ranks around that very person. So, like, at which point do we choose to live a full life and let go of what to me feels like almost an underhanded thought process in the power grab, and that the power isn't being exercised or used for the good of the people and the country?
Yeah, you know what, Granville, too, what I thought when you were talking about him getting stuck in a traffic jam, like we were saying, like I was saying, like Pedro Castillo, he's from a rural district of Peru, and the capital is in Lima, and that's the big city. And he's not as familiar with Lima. So frankly, he may not have even known how bad the traffic was in Lima. He's been in office, I'm serious, he's been in office for, I think, less than a year. And I think that the fact that caused him to botch his escape attempt, it's speaking to how much separation and division that they feel between people in the big cities and people in the country in Peru. And there's that divide, and it's also it's a socioeconomic, a political, and a racial divide in Peru. And I think that's like the whole energy here is there's a feeling of like these people are not for us, and there's not like a knowing of like, hey, we're like partnering, we're in this country together, it's like us versus them. And yeah,
I think spiritually there's so much to unpack about it. And I would say, like, first of all, like, none of the corruption that is done is excused by claims of racism and isolation that has been facing. But the fact that him and the media and the people are saying the same thing, I think there's something to look at there, and maybe there's something to look at in terms of like for people of color, and especially in Latin America, like patterns repeating, and also like this victim mentality. But and there's a deep need to heal it at the core, because they're gonna keep facing the same things over and over until it's done, and it's gonna repeat in their karma and the karma of the country. And about him being stuck in traffic, you have to remember, even though like I'm sure he didn't want to be stuck in traffic during his escape, at some level he chose this, and that's something deep I've been going into with the past few classes of Twin Flame Ascension School. Like, you cannot be robbed if you have not chosen it at some level. So no one else is responsible for it but you. And so what I'm saying is that his act, although not ideal, has the secondary benefits of proving to everyone that as Indigenous people in this situation of a political spectrum of Peru, they're victims, and like they're never going to be accepted, and they're always going to be like in a bad situation. And I think spiritually, like we need to remember that. And I think that there is some truth in like him and the people of minorities choosing this experience, although it does not excuse neither the racism that they face or the corruption on the other side.
I agree with that. I feel like Granville also kind of touched upon it when he was talking about choice and like this disconnect between power and choice. And I feel like there is some healing there for, you know, the Indigenous people and people that are just poor and impoverished in that country that thought that President Castillo was representing them, and you know, he's for the people. But it turns out that his own choices, even if he's coming from that, you know, the same population, the same group, it doesn't, you know, take away from kind of like the choices that he made. And I think it reflects the same to, you know, to everyone really, is that as individuals we all have a choice. And just because historically, you know, things have been, or they haven't been represented, and they've been underrepresented, even when they are represented by someone that outwardly looks like them and, you know, seems to have their same values, there's still like this disconnect. So I agree with you, Irene. I feel like there's like a deeper healing that has to happen in order for their politics to kind of reflect everyone and everyone's values more broadly.
I think you touched on something very deep there. I think the choice to elect him touches on the one for people to have representation, but like the actions that is done for the past few years actually are very similar to everything that we've seen in terms of dictatorship in Latin America for the past few decades. And so it doesn't feel like there was actually a change, even though it seems like there was a change there. And so it's a little bit more complex, obviously, because he's seen as being from the people, and he's indigenous as well. But it doesn't mean that how to say this? It doesn't mean that he has less responsibility to you know,
right,
hold up his position, I guess.
Yeah. It almost feels like a self-worth sort of thing, like not feeling maybe that you're worthy to even be in that position, perhaps. And maybe that's why he made those choices of corruption and, you know, other things. I don't remember exactly what he did, though.
Yeah, so like I feel like you've touched on quite an important component in the self-worth sentiment, because I feel like there's almost there's almost the element of wanting to elevate out of a certain position, but then literally being a self-fulfilling prophecy in the opposite direction. So you kind of become your own worst enemy, because as opposed to rising above it, you literally succumb to it it's literally like somebody finding fame and then succumbing to drugs because they can't handle the fame, yet they wanted the fame. You know, like that, just that comparative there. So I feel like there's a little bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy in that he's almost become his own worst enemy by being inculcated in scandals of corruption, where he was actually meant to be the proponent of helping the very people of the country that need the help and needed to find a symbolic figurehead that kind of stood out. And like something that I read was that there was even claims of, well, there's even an investigation into falsifying his master's thesis, you know, or falsifying parts of his master's thesis. I'm like, you know, like it's just that situation of somebody might do something to give themselves just a little bit of a leg up, but that very leg up is the thing that literally takes the foundation out of everything later. So it's almost a catch-22. Like, do you fight the good fight and get nowhere, or do you give yourself a slight leg up so that you can get somewhere in the hopes that you can make it better, which is kind of sometimes a narrative that we see play out, and that story always comes back to bite people. So you have to wonder, was he really the best advocate for people if these kind of things are starting to surface? And the fact that Sage says, well, you know, he's only been in power for a year, also says to me, well, you've been in power for a year, you've had the opportunity to surround yourself with people who are able to bolster you, and that you don't have to shoulder everything yourself, because literally he's one person, he cannot change it for the country. But he can put a cabinet in place, he can look at government departments where he can start to make a real difference. And my question is, has he made a real difference? And if he hasn't, was the assignment too big? Did you not understand the assignment?
There's something that I'm thinking in terms of, like, I don't think he was ill-meaning, and that's why I think he has the support of the people. But I've been thinking about it when you were speaking, Grendel, in terms of relationships, like romantic relationships. And I remember Shaleia saying that there's a way to attain a romantic relationship that is kind of dark and very controlling. And at the core, you know, you don't really have them, even though you're with that person. You have them by control. And nothing that you've ever built is true there, because it's not built on a true foundation. And what you said about, like, falsifying his thesis, which is a great fault in terms of, like, education, like even law, like, it can be like a penalty in someone's life, and other things like that about corruption. Feels like he's been building something and attaining his goal, which is really joyful, but it doesn't feel like it was with God. Like, it doesn't feel like it was made in love. And I feel like he had this, like, divine mission and divine purpose. And I think, in a sense, he really desired and wanted to do something for his country, because this is who he is at the core. But I don't think he had the right means to do that. but maybe that's just my opinion. But it did feel like I feel the comparison with like romantic relationships and the way to obtain them could explain how we think like, how has this gone so bad? How has he made so many bad choices? And it's actually because like the toolkit that he had, I guess, in his life wasn't the right one. And maybe he didn't know about it, maybe he did know about it, but the result is the same.
Yes, and the thing that stands out for me about it is, and again, it goes back to what was his intent. And I'm not certain that I understand his intent completely, and I'm not certain that it's really clear if something, because let's be honest, to do a master's thesis, in fact, to do any type of research paper, to publish in terms of, or to hand in terms of attaining a qualification, requires a level of trust and a level of honesty. And if there are questions, whether the questions are in that people are targeting him from the perspective of discrediting him or not, if there's a question around his integrity, that says to me something's shaky. And there may be a situation of the shakiness being that he's just target of rhetoric because people want to discredit him. But there's also the very real possibility that there's truth to these allegations, which then does allow for us to understand that it makes sense why, as additional follow-up, there are further allegations of corruption, because the integrity in and of itself is literally a very rocky foundation. So, and we know a rocky foundation, water's going to seep in there, things are going to fall through. There will be cracks in a shaky foundation. So I just have to wonder how solid the foundation is that he's built his life, his legacy, his presidency on.
I think you said it all. Yeah, I don't think his intent is very clear for anyone. That's just what I say. But yeah, it was kind of complete. Yeah. Yeah, cool. So a second thing we wanted to discuss was the trial of policeman Coeng. I don't know if I'm pronouncing his name correctly. Who is the person that is how to say that? That is, I guess, that has been pleaded guilty of like second-degree murder of George Floyd in 2020. And so, yeah, the fact that it's happening now is really like, I think it's really meaningful. It's been almost like, I think more than 2.5 years since George Floyd. I didn't even know like a trial was undergoing. I think like the 3 other policemen have been judged already. But yeah, there's probably like a lot of like, I feel more emotions about it. And I think maybe it's representative of like a lot of people finding maybe upheaval or closure with this trial. So I don't know. I'm just like wondering, how do you guys feel about the news of the trial?
I was I felt pleased to see this, especially also with Derek Chauvin, the main perpetrator of Mr. Floyd's death. I was happy to see that both of them have gotten some sort of sentencing, because historically, police officers usually don't experience any sort of like prison time, even when they have killed people in custody and just kind of violated every procedural step that they are supposed to know through training. So for me, it feels like a kind of pivotal moment, because I feel like George Floyd's death for a lot of people just kind of was a representation of the historical pain that has been felt a lot, especially just with like the development of policing in the United States, especially in the southern United States. I mean, initially they were made as slave patrols and, you know, to just control Black people. And then it kind of developed with segregation and all the Jim Crow era laws. So I feel like there's a lot of just heavy pain and, you know, it kind of feels like agony too, that a lot of communities have been carrying for generations. To see a decision like this, and I know unfortunately in the United States, not every jurisdiction is the same. So a decision like this happening in Minnesota, I believe, doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be a sweeping sort of change in our criminal justice system. But I think it's a really good first step, and it kind of shows like the change in decisions, like where we've come as a society. I think also just with like the Black Lives Matter movement and all the consequences that came out of George Floyd's death, I think it signals that, you know, there's a lot more awareness to just the injustices that happen to everyday people. And at least not for everyone, but there is a certain population in the country that just is like so fed up, they're no longer willing to just, you know, take it. And so I feel like this decision is kind of in support of all of that. And I hope it has become something that is more readily seen in our system, because police officers, unfortunately, they just get like fired, but, you know, there's no like actual criminal charges brought. So
I think something that you shared that I feel is very important and speaks to the concept and topic of accountability, in that those, like all of the awareness that has been created as a result, as you said, as the result of George Floyd's death, but also the Black Lives Matter movement, which if was it not very similar timeline in terms of when that movement actually really came to the forefront, and just lots of marginalized or previously disadvantaged communities starting to call for accountability and for just, and again, it's a continuation of what has been a rights conversation in various ways for very many years. But I feel like this has culminated in a definitely a deeper sense of holding people accountable, but also a deeper sense in people saying, as you pointed out, that we're just not going to take it anymore. We're not taking this lying down anymore. So it's almost the flip side of what we saw with Peru, in terms of not certain how people are accepting or understand their power, versus a shift like this case and the officers being fully charged and actually serving prison sentences, where you actually see a shift in people saying, this is our power and we're going to exercise our power. as visibly and as vocally as possible, and ensure that accountability becomes the standard. And a thing that I kind of almost want to check in with the people living in the US is, would this then not become a level of case law that gets quoted in other cases, even though jurisdictions are different?
From my understanding, I think so. Right, Sage?
Yeah. It can be, but I'm not an expert in that area, but I know if it's like at a federal court level, because if it's like just like a local court, like a municipal court or like a state court, then it's definitely precedent in your state and everything, or in your county or your city, but if it's like a federal court or higher, then it's bigger. It's like affecting people within like that. Yeah, federal court district basically, and everything like that. So yeah, and if you have any that go higher, like to the Supreme Court or whatever, like a federal appellate court that's higher, yeah, then it's like a precedent. So, but it's, yeah, you're right that the fact that it happened in like Minnesota, like Minneapolis is like a very liberal city, shows that like, yeah, maybe it was manifested that way because it's going to set more of a precedent. People are going to see that some officers can like will have to like, you know, have accountability there, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason why I'm asking is, sorry, Yureen, the reason why I'm asking is because in South Africa, because technically we're fully one judicial system. So it doesn't matter really at which level of the judicial system a decision like that is made or a judgment like that is received. It does have it kind of has the ripple effect of, as you said, Sage, a precedent, but it becomes case law that influences many things going forward. So oftentimes you will find it quoted, it will be, in terms of a precedent, it becomes a standard against which to then argue cases going forward. So it was just so important for me to understand kind of the jurisdictional implications of a decision like that, and whether, even though it's in one jurisdiction, it does have ramifications in others.
I feel like the fact that it has happened will influence, I'm sure, cases moving forward. I think in terms of historically, I can't remember the last time that something like this happened, because you know, in the 90s there was the LA riots. Forgetting his. I think even if it's not like official legal precedent in every jurisdiction, I think it's going to influence a lot of decisions other places moving forward.
Yeah, I think like in France, it's a little bit in between South Africa and the United States. What I feel like spiritually is that in law, like a jurisdiction feels like a boundary. So even before you asked the question, Grenville, I was feeling like it was going to be a precedent, because I think like a lot of like local cases in the 60s during like the civil rights movement became law afterwards. And I think it's good that the trial is setting a precedent of like, you're not going to do something that isn't lawfully right and humanly like right, and not have like justice afterwards, because it's only right that you'd be judged for what you do. And so it feels like it's like refocusing the responsibility of police and things like that. And I do feel like you guys that it's gonna probably influence the jurisdictions, and maybe not all the places, but some of the places. And I feel like, for example, in France, like jurisdictions that have like marked the system enter into like the law codes afterwards. So basically they are studied afterwards as if there were law, because as soon as this jurisdiction was passed, even though it was on the national side or local side, like every other cases was treated as such, because people would like cite these jurisdictions to like explain their case afterwards. So it feels like that's how like the system advanced. And I know like it's different in the United States, because every state has obviously their way of like doing things, because it's not like one state, it's like several states. I think France has won the World Cup. My neighbors are, sorry. I don't know if you can hear them, but yeah, good, okay. But yeah, I do think it still holds some power, and I think some impact otherwise. I don't think it would be like our second topic today if it didn't like hold some type of like true power. I think it's significant, not only humanly, but in terms of like justice too.
Yeah, I think it's definitely significant from a justice point of view, but I think it's the significance is even deeper to the core of actually standing up to what can just could be considered a level of tyranny from parties that held power. So I think it is standing up to bullying in a very powerful, very real, very honest way. And so it's definitely going to have an impact. And even if that impact's just to deter certain types of similar crappy behavior, it's a significant shift.
Yeah, I agree. Also, just energetically and spiritually, you know, that choice has been made. And oh, sorry, hold on.
That sounded like a microphone in a shopping center. Clean up on our clean up on our
Yep. That's exactly what it sounds like. It's like a pager, you know, at work. Yeah. It sounds just like that. But yeah, just that choice has been made and the boundary is there now, and I feel like there's just momentum this direction now for there to be accountability there, and that feels relieving that this choice has been.
I feel like there's another thing that stands out to me in this process, and it's probably much more related to our process as a team in this conversation, in that George Floyd was probably one of our earliest topics in Black Lives, in the Why Black Lives Matter conversation. It was one of our earliest topics in that conversation.
It was actually the reason why Black Lives Matter was created. Oh my God.
Yeah, so, you know, it's quite significant to have walked this path, looking at that specific case and being aware of it right from the very beginning and seeing it come full circle to a point of really very significant, powerful core choices. It just, it's kind of like, hey, there's been significant healing attached to this process as we've gone along. And I know all of you haven't been there, but Urania and I were there from the beginning. So that it just stood out for me in that sense that, hey, this has really come full circle.
I didn't even think about it, but yeah, I think George Floyd's murder is what sparked this new wave of Black Lives Matter, because it existed earlier, but it really had taken up in 2020. It inspired Jeff and Shaleia's sermon about Black Lives Matter, and the after church tea time discussion, very emotional. I still remember to this day, that followed afterwards. Wow. And since then, we have never stopped. I think maybe that's why it was emotional too. But yeah, it feels like, wow, okay, 2.5 years, but we do heal, and things do change, and we do choose heaven in this place, and it's pretty cool to actually have it. It's weird to say, but it's cool to have it on camera that, hey, we did it. In terms of spiritually, it just feels like completion, and maybe that's why I was feeling all these emotions come up. But yeah, it's pretty cool.
It's really important to also acknowledge that, because as you say, it was the catalyst that really opened up the avenue for the conversation. It opened up the avenue for significant amounts of healing, but it's also opened up the avenue for us to take stock and go and realize the shift. And it's quite a powerful shift to have come to this point, given, and especially what Andrea shared about how policing actually evolved to the point where it is now. I mean, we had so many conversations around police accountability and how they're trained to follow a route that is much more violent, much more quickly, to de-escalate the situation in the hopes that they would de-escalate the situation and inadvertently escalating the situation. So, it's just significant for us to connect the dots. And, it might sound a little bit gratuitous, but also to pat ourselves on the back, like we freaking worked hard here.
Yeah, because I think maybe 2 months into Black Lives Matter, we had a discussion about never giving up, and about the fact that the movement was also a culture and a journey and a way of living instead of just a moment. And the fact that we have not given up, we are still here, and Black Lives Matter discussion and now Seeking Harmony still have impact in our community, is still in our hearts and minds. Just appreciating. I think it's safe to appreciate what God gave us here, this space with Jeff and Shaleia, and the way it evolved. And yeah, I'm pretty proud of it. I think it's safe to know hey, we did good. Okay, pat on the back. But yeah, and the fact that it's not over and that there's a sense of like eternity and joy, like it really felt very heavy in here, and we still did it. So yeah, I'm grateful for this space and this work, definitely.
Yeah, and I'm pointing it out because it's something that Brienne and I worked through in my coaching session, was how we still receive what we've asked for. We just never, or we don't always receive it in the way that we thought we would receive it. So, and it was just like, it's just a culmination and a reminder that you do receive what you've asked for. You kind of just need to be very spiritually aware of how that gift is coming through. You almost need to take spiritual stock of this gift is coming through, but it may be coming through in the form of another lesson or in the form of another upset, but you always receive what you've asked for, which was, and it's a significant shift of perspective that we need to probably inculcate into our way of interacting with life and interacting with the world, because it will also shift us out of the space of thinking that we're always in upset, or thinking that we always have heavy lifting to do.
Thanks for sharing that. I felt like I needed to hear that.
Cool, you are very welcome. Good. So what do you guys feel is our next topic? I think we've kind of come to the conclusion, the natural conclusion of the speaking about the trial that's happening, and just the sentencing that's happening, and really the power of consistency in pursuing justice in these respects.
Yeah, I was wondering if you guys felt like talking about Brittany Griner's her like release, like from Russia. Do you guys feel like that resonates with you? Because it's kind of on the same lines too, because it definitely touches on like Black Lives Matter and the politics of that in the US and everything. And yeah, it just seems like it happened like all of a sudden. Like we didn't really hear any news about it or any developments going on. It just seems like, all of a sudden Russia was like, sure, man, let's make a deal. They were going to swap Victor Bout, I think it's pronounced Bout, the merchant of death, not drug dealer, I'm sorry, weapons dealer, arms dealer. I was going to say drug dealer. Maybe some of that too. It helps to diversify your sources of income. But he, was traded for Brittany Griner by Russia. I feel like Russia feels like, I don't know what it could be, like it wants to like improve its standing in the world or something. And that it's really, I don't know what Russia's intention was, but it seems like things have only gotten tougher for them and more contrasting for them. And that the US was able to have this deal, basically. I don't know. Yeah, what do you guys feel about it?
Either that or they didn't value it as a good weapon, like a good means to like leverage power. I don't know. I don't really know. Like not sure. And yeah, what did you want to say?
I don't know. I wonder, there's some people saying that the US made a bad deal, I guess, because of the comparison between Brittany and then this Victor man, you know, she had like just THC oil on her. She's, you know, 2-time Olympic athlete. Whereas, you know, Victor, I don't know how you pronounce his last name, but, you know, the Merchant of Death, whatever, like he seems to have more serious allegations against him and seems to be more valid, you know, as like a prisoner. And so some people were saying like this was, the US could have been more assertive with, you know, essentially Russia illegally detaining a US citizen, as some people see it. So I was curious on how you all felt about that.
The way, I don't know. The way I felt about it was, it's a person that a foreign country was like holding hostage, and like, yeah, she, you know, of course, like she manifested that, and at some level, like chose it or called it into her life, like that experience. But it's some other person. It's analogous to like what I felt it was analogous to was there's this Twin Flame Ascension School class where, you know, Jeff and Shaleia are asking the students to try to rob them. And this is over Google Hangouts, like they're hosting a class, but they're trying to extort Jeff for money and trying to use leverage against him. And I think Chrissy won the exercise, and she was like, she was threatening like Shaleia and in the exercise. And Jeff was like, yeah, I'll give you my money, you know, because he cares about Shaleia and he'll do anything to protect her. And I was like, I feel like this is similar, because I'm like, to me, it seemed cold and detached and cynical to be like, oh, this was a bad trade, you know. It's like, no, this is one of our citizens who was detained in a foreign country wrongfully. Like, why would you not make a deal? You know what I mean? That's like, because how cold it would be if you were like, oh, no, you're not getting my money. You know, that's worth more to me. No, your person is worth more to you. Like you know what I mean? I don't know. What do you guys feel about that? I felt like it's obvious what you would do.
I kind of agree. I thought it was weird that some people felt like the Marine also had to be part of the trade. Like her life wasn't. Yeah, I don't know. I felt like it was a weird comparison. Like, you know, why does it matter if one is more a valid prisoner and the other isn't? Like, it's still the life of the person is still valuable. And
Yeah.
I don't know, Yoreen, what did you want to add?
Yeah, I don't think we can like equate trading humans with like trading goods and money, obviously, and waving gold and armies in the deal. Even though it does feel like that sometimes, I think it was wrong to call it like a bad deal. But we also know from like discussing this with Jeff that there was a very like political intention of like winning the black vote by Biden being invested into bringing her home. I think it's very beautiful though that she's like being brought home for Christmas. I think it's pretty cool. And I don't think that it's mutually exclusive to have like a political move and also like wanting to like save your US citizen. I don't think like these two are, I think like there's a component of the two in the choice, but I definitely wouldn't like call this like the fact that people have been seeing this into, obviously it's a diplomatic deal. I think it's very important to like say that the fact that people have been seeing this as a deal that can be quantified, I don't know. It just feels weird and wrong. And I know like ever since we started like discussing this, there's been this feeling of like they're like dehumanizing things that are like that, and there's something obviously that feels bad here, that needs to be healed about like the whole thing about like trading humans and like using this as a tool. But yeah, I don't know. Underneath that, like I do feel like there's a care for the US, a deep care for the US and its citizens that is being put into there. And underneath that, I do feel like there is also a political move. But yeah, I think it's a several layered cake, definitely.
So my feeling is a lot more at an individual level. And yes, we have two very different individuals detained for two very different reasons. But individually, both of them have made quite a significant core choice in terms of choosing their freedom from the circumstance. And I just don't want us to miss that part, the power of the choice of these two individuals, regardless of what the situation or circumstances were around each one of theirs detention and what led to the detention. At the core of it, my feeling is that they chose freedom. They chose to transcend their detention. They chose their repatriation. They are choosing themselves, really, in the situation. If you really look at the core of it, they're really making a very solid choice to choose themselves. Regardless of how it played out for either one of them, there's a very powerful personal core choice that we mustn't lose sight of. Was that too left field for you guys?
No,
everybody's trying to absorb this one.
No, I agree.
Yeah. No, we were chewing on this. But I do feel like, yeah, at the core, like when you started talking, I feel at the core, they're human beings. And I don't have to forget that. But yeah, obviously, like, we need to balance their choices. But yeah, definitely.
Cool. Well, on that note, thank you for today's conversation, everybody. I think it was quite an in-depth conversation of three very different topics, but very much a golden thread of the power of choice in all of those topics and the power of accountability. Also, to everybody that has followed us today and who's liked our conversation, to everybody else who sees it, please feel free to like and subscribe to our Church of Union YouTube channel, where you will find our previous conversations that have happened in our Unionism Spiritual Discussion group on Facebook. And we look forward to seeing all of you soon. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.